Hey Threadheads, it's Sophia, your producer here. I'm so excited for you guys to watch this episode. This week, Dr. Brian got to talk to a group of youth pastors and kids pastors, and we got to record this session talking about why theology should matter when you're preaching to Gen Z and Gen Alpha, but it's also just pertinent for parents, group leaders, Gen Z themselves. It's really for everyone, so I hope you enjoy. We're gonna have a Q&A coming up this week on Did We Miss Anything?
We need stronger, trusted voices. We need calm voices. We need moderate voices, not moderately politically, but just moderate voices in general, restrained voices, telling people what, and this is the heart of everything I do, what Christians really believe. Not what some Christians believe or what Christians should believe, but really what Christians really believe. And so it's into that discussion that will kind of get the rolling start into our episode today. So I always like to say, hello, everybody. Dr. Brian Jenkins here with you. I have a great opportunity to talk to some youth and children's pastors in the Pacific Northwest today. And so I'm honored to be here with you. What we want to talk about for the next several minutes is this idea of why theology matters, not just why theology matters, but why theology matters to, right now at least, the specific generations of Gen Z and Gen Alpha. Now, you may not know what that means. I'm just going to tell you, if you're a parent and you're a part of this, like I am, it's your teenager and your kids. So we'll just say that. If you're a grandparent, teenager and kids. If you're an aunt or an uncle, teenager and kids. If you are a youth leader or a pastor, I'm talking about the teenagers and kids in your church. Why does it matter what we believe? So a prominent worldview that exists is it's okay to believe whatever you want as long as it doesn't hurt anybody. Okay? I think we all know that, and I can see your faces, and I know you would all nod and things like that. What's the problem with that? The problem with that is that it's, number one, it's not true, but number two, there is no such thing as a worldview that won't eventually hurt or affect someone else. At the very least, it'll affect you. What do I mean when I say worldview? A lot of times we talk about ideas, we talk about culture, we talk about the world. When I talk about worldview, or when we talk about worldview on the show, it's really the deepest possible layer of how people order the world. It is your beliefs. So what happens a lot of times is when we're preaching or communicating or teaching, we talk about things like, I want to change people's minds. I need them to learn something. Man, if we just had a great altar night and if kids would just come to the altar, their lives would be changed forever. If we just prayed through. The problem with our youth group is we don't worship long enough. Or the problem with our youth group is the youth pastor doesn't preach long enough. Or the problem with our youth group is no one's talking about how to break these cycles of behavior. Our kids don't behave well enough. What that does is the mistake is in saying that one of those will fix it. That addressing one of those will change things. Or we need to go against culture, or we need to attack this other thing. The truth is that the most powerful thing that shapes the way even a 4-year-old orders their world is the concept of worldview. So everything I've done have been built on this concept that your worldview, and if you want to take notes, you can, your worldview is built of three massive things. It's your ideas. In other words, what you think about the world around you, how you have intellectually ordered the world around you, okay, how you've made sense of it. What you feel, in other words, how you experience the world and the rituals you kind of use to emotionally navigate the world. You say, well, hold on, I don't use rituals. If you do the same behaviors every day when you wake up, like, okay, I know I get up, use the bathroom, brush my teeth, then I comb my hair, then I walk the dogs. And then what happens is if that order gets disrupted, if your day goes a little wonky, congratulations, you have an emotionally sustaining and valid ritual that keeps your world afloat, right? So if your morning doesn't go right and your day's horrible, you have a ritual. So there we go. Well, we're Christians. We don't believe in rituals. Well, then why are our services exactly the same every week? We have water baptism, we have communion, we have mass, but they're the way that we order. And then what Paul Hebert, who's an anthropologist, called your values, or the way that you evaluate the world. So those are your morals and your ethics. So it's ideas, how I think about the world, feelings, how I experience and emotionally navigate the world, and then my values, how I behave and expect others to behave. That is the stakes at which we play. We don't talk about, as Christians, we are not just dealing with getting kids to act better, okay? Or as Christians, we're not just getting people to think the right way. Or as Christians, we're not just, we need to feel better about ourselves. If we stay there, that's why, honestly, transformation of self or transformation of people becomes so limited. Or, for as many of you may have experienced, depending on how tenured you are in youth ministry, when a kid goes and they go off to college, or they go off or they leave home for the first time, or maybe you're a parent and you said, man, my kids went off and it seems like they all lost their minds. It's because they encountered something that, although they agreed, they said, I believe these things, they say I'm a good kid, all this kind of stuff, something wasn't deeply rooted enough in their lives at the worldview level, right, for that to sustain that. And so that's why transformation can be so difficult. Well, how could a kid, it's a real simple question, how could a kid come to our youth group every week and not change? We all have to ask that question. So if you are a youth pastor, kids pastor, if you're a parent, if you're even a pastor and somehow you've come across a podcast, like however you're experiencing this, how could someone come in contact with, let's be honest, let's put it on our shoulders, my ministry, and after 4, 5, 6 years of it, be exactly the same? And my argument, my basic premise is that whatever we are doing is not penetrating down to the worldview level. That kid may have a great experience at camp, they're going to cry. I grew up Southern Pentecostal, so I'm talking about running, shouting, falling over, laughing. I mean, no snake handling, but I'm pretty sure there was some, I don't know, like the weird grass-eating kids outside probably did some stuff. Like, I don't know. But we all have this sense, and as Pentecostals, we're like, man, if I can just I'll get them to camp, right? That's what we're saying. When we say that, we're saying an experience will change them. Or if we say, if I can just get a kid to read his Bible every single day. You know, I know some kids in our youth group are doing the Bible shred, where we're gonna read the Bible, the whole Bible in a month. And I'm like, okay. I'm not, but hear me say, I'm not hating against any of those ideas. But when we do it all, we're saying, we are looking for the silver bullet. We don't realize that the concept of worldview is at your deepest. You say, well, Brian, where is this in the Bible? Ephesians chapter 2 talks about, we combat what's called, and depending on the translation you use, in Ephesians chapter 2, 1 kind of through 7, it talks about the spirit of the age, or the age or the era of this reality. That is a worldview. That's the language of worldview. That there is a way that everyone else sees the world. And our kids, my kids, so I'm a parent of 3 kids. I still have a teenager who goes to Adrian and Josh's youth group, okay? My kids are being introduced to an entire way of seeing the world, and I'm trying to introduce them to an entire way of seeing the world. And if I'm just saying, do you love Jesus or do you want to be a good person, that's not going to be enough. You say, well, how do you know that's true? Well, first off, I would say that my daughter's generation, the generations you work with, face challenges. We have to acknowledge that they're facing challenges completely unique to them, and that the worldview for many of them that they're using to face those challenges is completely inadequate, right? So the reason why. So let's look at some numbers real quick. These come from the CDC, so the Center for Disease Control. In 2021, 42% of high school students experience persisting feelings of sadness or hopelessness. By the way, you want to get really scared? I was starting to do research for this, guys. I would never want to be a teenage girl. I'm just going to say that right now. It's terrifying because everything that I'm saying right now is worse for teenage girls. I mean, exponentially worse, by the way. So, like, for example, if you're a teenage girl, you are up to 4 times more likely to experience sexual violence than you are. Okay? Teenage boys, 4%. Teenage girls, 17% of teenage girls, right? Over the numbers on teenage girls being pressured to have sex before marriage, experience physical dating violence. By the way, that number, 42% of feeling sad or hopeless, 56% of that was teenage girls. So that means if you had 10 kids at your youth group last night, 4 of them that were there feel sad or depressed at least 2 or 3 times a week for the last month. And if you had a group they were all girls, if you had your girls' small group and there were 10 girls in there, 6 of them felt that way. And only 3 of the boys did. So these are incredibly unique challenges. They face unique challenges due to social media. They face unique challenges when it comes to the pressures of just being a kid in the modern society. They face the unique challenges of being in lockdown for 2+ years, depending on what part of the country you're in. They face these incredibly unique challenges. And what we have to say is, based on numbers, not on gloom and doom prophecy or anything like that, just based on the sheer reality of statistics, their worldview is not handling it well. They don't have a worldview that can make sense of the reality that's presented to them. Does that make sense to everybody? You can nod, and I'm still tracking with you. Okay? So what then the question comes, well, what is their worldview? Like, what is it that they're believing? Well, they believe a few things differently. The biggest thing is that 34% of Gen Zers, so whatever that means, but let's just call them teenagers right now, 34% of teenagers and young adults right now would view themselves as religiously unaffiliated. But here's the crazy thing, okay? So 34% of them are going to say religiously unaffiliated, but almost 70% of them are going to say that they're spiritual people. So what that means is that they are more open almost than any other generation to spiritual realities. They're just not buying what we're giving them. All right? So it's not that they don't believe. It's not that we all worry about the nuns and by nuns I don't mean Catholic women ministers. I mean NONES. In case anyone was confused about that, I don't know. What we're saying is that they're saying, yeah, I believe it. I just don't want that. I don't want that. And what is it that they don't want? It's not that they don't want Jesus. Barna did a study last year that was incredible about their openness to the reality of Jesus Christ and their trust that the Bible is the best source for the reality of Jesus Christ. So they're open to the concept of Jesus. They're open to the idea that there's a world out there that's better than the one that we currently inhabit and that it could aspire to. But they don't want the one, quote unquote, that we as a world church culture are offering them. So there's 2 ways to say that. There's a couple ways are looking at that. One is saying, oh yeah, well, that's just the wickedness of the age and they'll always hate the church. Okay, there's a truth to that. One is that they're kids and they don't know what that's good for them. Yeah, but I was a kid. I didn't know it was good for me either. So we'll check that. That's every generation of kids. Or the other is that, have we been telling them what we believe, or have we been telling them what Christians really believe? What gospel have we been selling? Have we been presenting to them? Have we been giving to my kids a gospel that truly answers the deepest longings, the deepest tensions, and the deepest realities? Or do we just treat them and their worldview as wrong, and I'm going to tell you why? Do we treat them as what you feel is wrong, and I'm going to tell you why? Or do we say what you value and how you behave is wrong, and I'm going to tell you why? So when you talk about changing worldviews, when you talk about transforming people's lives and letting the gospel transform people's lives, my argument or my premise on any generation, but specifically with Gen Z and Gen Alpha, would be that any ministry to them must be grounded in what we would call, or I would call, or the podcast would call, a gospel worldview. A gospel worldview. That in order for it to bring the hope and the peace and the security and everything that we need it to believe, it's got to be rooted in that. Okay? So what does this mean for you all? For the men and women that, and if you're listening to this, the podcast version of it, I've got a screen full of incredible youth pastors and children's pastors from across the Pacific Northwest and northern Idaho as well, and the east side of the mountains. And it's as diverse a ministry context as you could possibly be thinking, right? So you may be listening or watching or even being a part of the Zoom call part of this, and you're saying, yeah, but Brian, you're over there, and you're in King County, and I'm over here on the east side, and, you don't get it. We're just good Washington country people, and we're, all that kind of stuff, and we're good American values and all that. And I would say you are absolutely, that is a fascinating way to think. That's all I'm going to say. Because these numbers are everywhere. That the idea of generations moving beyond these sort of assumed worldviews and values is real, and it's here. And they can find, and the reason why is they can find answers to these questions the second they open their phone. And they are, as a generation, more, not cynical, they have probably the greatest authenticity radar of any generation we've ever seen. They will, when they meet you in person, they know if you're real or fake. But if they watch you on a screen, they don't care. It's the weirdest thing. They're like, you're fake, you're a poser, I can't trust you, and this guy told me I should eat Tide Pods, so let's go. Like, it's the craziest kind of like, where did this come from? We can't necessarily control what's happening on the screen, but we can say, who am I and what am I talking about when I'm the one in front of them? And is the core content of what I'm putting in front of them a gospel worldview that addresses their ideas, their feelings, and their values? And am I speaking into that? Okay? So a couple of other things that might be interesting to you, and we'll put these stats in the show notes and give them to you guys as well. Here's something that was interesting. Discovered that a majority of America's least least religious generation is what they say they are, but they identify as religious or spiritual, 77%. Again, so keep that in mind. It's just not the same to them. They distinguish them. According to the findings of researcher Daniel Cox, what most distinguishes Generation Z from previous generations is not that Gen Zers are more likely to leave their childhood religion, but that this is the first generation where the majority of them lacked a religious upbringing at all. So it's not that they're leaving, it's that when they show up to your youth group for the first time, they don't have Sunday school, they don't have, VBS, they don't have a lot of that showing up. So that means that if I have on average, let's just say one new kid a week, I have to accommodate for that kid not knowing anything anybody's talking about. Ever. They don't know anything. And so I'll get to this a little bit in a minute, but that means I'm talking about preaching, conversation, discipleship, the service itself, all that type of stuff. So what does this mean? How can we do it? Okay. So there's three things that I want to talk to you about in terms of bringing gospel worldview into it. So if you're a parent, talking to your kids about the gospel, if you're a youth pastor, if you are just, maybe you're a small group leader, you're a youth leader at your church, whatever. The first thing that has to start is you have to just, as I've said several times, you have to focus on what Christians really believe. That's what you have to make your priority. You say, well, what do you mean by that? The concept of a creed, which is what my doctorate's in, is a simplified statement about the essence of gospel belief, right? So many of you probably are familiar with the Apostles' Creed. So I believe in God the Father, Almighty, maker of heaven, maker of earth. Okay, it's a simple statement. So when I talk about the gospel, one of the big metaphors that I use is I talk about it as a seed. And when I talk about the gospel to people of any generation or any worldview, I'm not trying. You guys see these, if you're listening, you can't see it, but there's these are fake, I think, right? Yeah, there's these fake plants behind me, so the metaphor just fell apart completely. Never mind. Imagine with me that these were real plants, right? Or if you did like elementary school science when you put the bean in the plastic cup that you could see through, right? So every seed in the world has three basic components. It has a root, a stalk, and a leaf. So if I'm bringing the gospel, I'm having to make sure that the root, the stalk, and the bloom or the leaf of the gospel are the things that I'm focusing on at the most culturally and developmentally primary level as possible. Now notice what I said, culturally and developmentally. So I'm not saying try to be the coolest guy or gal on the planet or talk to people like they're idiots. That is not what I'm saying. I'm talking about being culturally and developmentally appropriate, all right? So when I talk about it, what is the root of the gospel worldview? It is our confession. One simple statement. What do Christians really believe? Jesus is Lord and God raised him from the dead. That's the root of what Christians believe. If you were to go ask the average high school student in your town, what do you think Christians really believe? We can't do a lot of back and forth right now, but think about what that answer would be. Oh, they believe this. They believe, and you'll hear answers like, they believe that gay people are going to hell. That's what Christians believe. So you would think there's a perception that that's the entire root of our worldview. Oh, Christians in America think that you have to be Republican to go to heaven. Christians in America think that science isn't real. But what do Christians really believe? They believe, above all things, that Jesus is Lord and God raised him from the dead. Paul says it, Romans 10:9, if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. The root of that, so think about what a root does. A root sits inside a soil, and then everything through that soil filters through that to grow. The problem is that a lot of people have a different worldview, and then what they try to do is they filter Jesus through that. So if the foundation, let's say, of an adult, if you're talking to an adult leader, the foundation of their worldview is, I've got to make as much money as I can before I die, then they're going to filter Jesus through their money rather than filtering their money through Jesus, through the lordship of Jesus Christ. You as youth pastors have to have discussions about gender, sexuality, all of these controversial issues. Are we filtering those? Are we filtering Jesus through those predisposed worldviews? Or are we saying, I'll have that conversation with you. We need to talk about that. Let's talk about that. But first we have to say, what does Jesus say about that issue? What does Jesus say about your political opinions? What does Jesus say about what you're going through with your parents? What does Jesus say about the bitterness that you have in your heart? What does Jesus say about the choices you're making in your dating life? What does Jesus say? Rather than trying to fit Jesus through the filter of whatever is our actual worldview, we have to start planting the idea of the lordship of Jesus Christ into people's life. Now notice I'm not saying harvesting, I'm saying planting. And that every interaction is a chance to either plant or cultivate and then perhaps harvest this in someone's life. Every sermon, every interaction, every small group lesson, every, trip to Six Flags. Do youth groups still do that anymore? Do the lawyers let them? I don't know. But anything like that, I'm really old too, by the way. I mean, shout out to, there's some people on this call though that would know what a human video is. You know who you are. And I'm talking about Carmen human videos, right? Actually, I have a Buddy Barrel sticker on some of my stuff here. But what I mean by that is, am I filtering that through Jesus? So a way to know, by the way, even in your own life, is if Jesus is the root of your worldview, is to say, when I face a challenge, do I bring it under Jesus or do I try to make Jesus fit into the challenge? So what then grows out of that? So you have a root. What grows out of that? What we call the stalk or the stump or the trunk or whatever, if you think of a tree. And that's really our core theology. So what do Christians really believe? We essentially believe four things. God made it, we broke it, Jesus fixes it, and the church shares it. That's what you have to keep it that simple. You have to start. By the way, none of those are simple statements, by the way, when you really start thinking about it. So if somebody says, hey man, what about science? Why do Christians deny science, right? And I'm sorry, I have this sort of TikTok, YouTube shorts kind of aggression, right? What do, look at this, atheist owns Christian youth pastor video, like that type of thing, right? And you say, well, what do you think about science? And I would start with, well, God made it, so let's start there. Well, what about the dinosaurs? God made it. Did Adam have a belly button? God made it. How old is the planet? I have to start at the place where I believe what the Bible says. Okay, God made it. God is the loving, benevolent creator of the universe. That's what I believe. Well, how long did he take to create it? He's the loving, benevolent creator of the universe. Do we have a young earth or an old earth? He's the loving, benevolent creator of the universe. You have to find these shared points. Then someone would say, okay, well, we talk about sin. We broke it. We did that. Sin is on us. But Jesus fixes it. Jesus is the only way to repair the breach between God and man. And then the mission of the church, above all things, is to share the lordship of Jesus Christ. So by simplifying it, I hopefully keep the heart of what I'm trying to do away from any other worldview's agenda that would seep into my gospel communication. Because this is when people say, well, should I preach about this? And my answer is, if it is centered in the lordship of Jesus Christ, and it is founded in one of these theologically orthodox credo statements, then yeah. But if it's just you either wanting to be controversial or get views or get something off your chest, you might want to slow the roll on that. So we have this root, lordship of Jesus Christ, we have the stalk, and then finally there's the bloom. And what does the bloom do in a plant, the flower or the fruit? It is what both attracts and replicates the plant as a whole. And that is the simple command of Jesus, to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. Those components alone should generate 8 years worth of preaching, right? And then what I do now is I go into that. But by sharing that as the essence of a gospel worldview, now what I can do is I can say, hey, there's worldviews out there that are going to say this. This is what Christians believe. And rather than convincing or trying to browbeat or own or win the debate or whatever, hopefully what you're doing, or what any of us are doing, are simply sharing what Christians believe. That's all I'm doing. Any of us, we're just sharing. Because that's what people want. I really believe this, and I want to share it with you. I'm assuming, I was told going into this that you're all very astute and you're sharp leaders and you're really smart and very intelligent. So you all know the value of authenticity to these generations. And by the way, that's true of every generation. I just thought I'd throw that in as well. But especially to this generation, then they have no problem with you saying, I really believe this. I really believe that Jesus, my relationship with Jesus, helps me deal with all of my guilt and all of my shame. I really believe that Jesus has helped me navigate the hurt that I went through when I was your age. I really believe. And they will be, in a lot of ways, the least judgmental of that statement than almost any other generation. They're the least likely to tell you you're wrong. But if you go in guns blazing with this sort of, apologetics, I'm not downing apologetics, by the way, that's incredibly important. But if this idea of winning rather than bearing witness, rather than sharing. So we have to focus on what Christians really believe. And then the other thing that's important in the way that I talk about theology, why theology matters, is because the gospel worldview best answers the questions that people ultimately are always asking. And I'm going to be honest with you. There's really only 4 questions, okay? 4 critical questions that have to be answered in your gospel preaching, your gospel teaching, your gospel discipleship. The question of origin, meaning, morality, and destiny. Where did I come from? Origin. Why am I here? Meaning. Morality, how should I live? Destiny, what happens when I die? And even the toughest question that 14-year-old is asking is somehow related to one of these 4. And it's your job to do the work to show them that. So if you're dealing with a student who's coming from a horrible situation, and they're like one of these students from this survey that I referenced earlier, where 22% of Gen Z, as of 2021, 22% has seriously considered attempting suicide. Okay? 22%. If you had 100 students at your last youth event, 22 of them, 1/5 of them, thought about taking their own life. Seriously. Okay? 1 in 5. Right? If you took 5 kids to go grab a hamburger and play video games, one of them in the last 2 years has thought about taking their life. All right? And if we can't show them why they're here and who made them, that's an origin and meaning issue. Is it a mental health issue? Absolutely. Is it probably a biological mental health, like a neurological issue? Absolutely. And it is a spiritual issue. Quit trying to make everything these neat little categories. Some of you may have gone to Starbucks this morning and gotten a latte. And what we try to do is we try to take the syrup and the milk and the espresso and separate them out. Once you pour them all together, you can't take them apart. That's a worldview. You can't separate these things. You can't separate the biology from the behavior, from the spiritual reality. You have to be speaking on all of these things. It's like a flywheel where all these things have to be addressed. If you're talking with a youth leader and they say, I don't understand why every job I hate, you have to understand part of that is it's because you don't know why you're here. You don't know what God has created you to do. Right? People say, how far should I go or not go with my girlfriend? That is a morality. What is the appropriate way to live in the light that I'm a created being, God created me, and that he created me for a purpose and with a purpose. Therefore, how I behave, not just in myself, but how I treat other people. Why did I get in trouble for saying this to that different kid at school? Because you're not recognizing that they were created by God. It's a spiritual issue. Why do we have so much hate and people saying horrible things about each other online? And these kids, by the way, would say, why are you adults all saying such horrible things about each other? How could some of these kids say the numbers about kids being bullied in these statistics, either online or in person? 1/3 of high school teenage girls afraid to go to school because of what they're going to face, because someone has never told them that every single kid in their school was made on purpose for a purpose by a loving God, and that they matter and that they're here for a reason. And that includes you, 1 in 5 kid who thinks about taking their own life. And we say, well, I tell them they matter to God. Yeah, but they matter to you. And it can't be slogans. It has to be so much deeper. It has to be so much deeper. Destiny. And that's a tough one. It's a lot easier to talk about destiny with older people and senior, it just is because they're a lot closer. But let me tell you something. I do have, like I said, I have teenagers, and in the wake of what happens with school shootings and violence and all that kind of stuff, there are a lot of kids who worry about what's going to happen to them almost every day. And that we say we have a peace that no matter what happens, and by the way, if you have an eternal peace in your life, do you realize the effects that has in your peace on this side of reality as well? So we have to ask ourselves, are we answering the questions worth answering? Or, and I'll get to this, I'll unpack that in a second. So focus on what Christians really believe, answer the questions worth answering, and then finally engage that entire worldview. Talk about ideas, build and cultivate experiences, and model and disciple or lead or train in just good moral behavior. You got to do all three. And if you're like, oh, my preaching's kind of this, great, get better at the other two. I mean, that's all I'm going to say to you, by the way. You don't get a pass. Oh, we're a real high experience youth group. Awesome. Start a Bible study, or at least just say, hey, I'm not really good at Bible study, so here's Theology Threads. Listen to it and we'll talk about it on Friday night. I don't know, shameless plug. So if we have a problem, and the problem is that, really what is the problem? Is that most worldviews really aren't adequate, especially the current worldview, in my opinion, sort of the compiled ad hoc worldview that a lot of teenagers have to scrap together. The problem is that most worldviews simply cannot withstand the pressures of legitimate, just everyday life or the uniqueness of any given generation. So what is the solution to that? The solution is this. We have to start framing, preaching, introducing, cultivating, reinforcing a gospel or a Jesus or a lordship-centered worldview. Okay? So what do I need you to do? 3 things. As a theologian, okay? As a educator, when it comes to like one of the things that I teach at Trinity Bible College and Graduate School in North Dakota. What do I teach? I teach on preaching. I teach on preaching. What do I need you to do as a teacher? What do I need you to do as a theologian? What do I need you to do as a pastor? But really, what do I need you to do as a parent? I am a parent of a high school student. What do I need you to do? Number 1, I need you to take your preaching and platform time seriously. I need you to. I need you to not worry about being clever. I need you to not worry about being catchy. I need you to not worry about honestly being relevant. I need you to not worry about whether or not this is going to make a good clip. And I know I'm speaking in stereotypes, and I know this is none of this is true for any of you. It'll be for the person you share this with and say, bro, he was talking about you because you're, kind of weird. But anyway, just that's fine. Whatever you want to do. I need you to take all of it seriously. I need you to take your prep with the content that you're talking about. Is it gospel and Bible centered? I need you to talk about your actual style. Are you someone personally that I can trust my kid with? Are you someone that as a parent, I want my kid listening to? Okay? Because I don't want you to be like my kid. I need you to be someone my kid wants to be like. Okay? Please. That one got, anyway. I need you to take that seriously, and I need you to take your process seriously. I really do. The guys that are on the call that are part of my process, like I do preaching coaching here at our church. They know process, and they can nod on the call. All 3 of these. We take content seriously. We take process seriously. And believe it or not, even me, as old and as nerdy and as goofy as I am, we talk style in terms of not only your preaching style, but your presentation style. We take that all very seriously. And I'm looking at myself and I'm realizing I'm wearing this shirt. I'm dressed I'm almost exactly the same outfit I would have worn in the 8th grade. And that was 1987, but that's a whole other, anyway, okay. I need you to take your preaching seriously. Number 2, I need you to become a student of your students. Learn the world that they inhabit. What I don't need you to be is one of your students. I need you to be a student of your students, okay? You have to have a credibility that matches your influence. And right now, you all have a ton of influence, but just where you're at in the stages in your careers, well, not everyone. I'm not looking at Gary Modine specifically, but amongst some of the rest of us, you're sort of on the front end of a lot of it, and credibility. So I tell this to people all the time. You get to help people navigate their lives either because of influence or credibility. If you have credibility, sometimes your influence is a little weird because you're either, maybe you're a little nerdy or goofy, but you know what you're talking about. If you have influence, it's because you're charismatic. You have the riz, as kids say. Is that something kids say? I don't know. Just nod or no. Oh, wow. They're logging off. They're all just shutting off their cameras. But if you have the influence and no credibility, if you have credibility and no influence, you're useless. But if you have influence and no credibility, you're dangerous. And so I need you to work on both. I just need you to work on both. And then what I need you to do is replace intimidation and outrage with confident curiosity. Okay? And I actually sat down with my 16-year-old and asked her some of these things. And she said, it feels like a lot of times, and one thing that she said was she's raised in church. So I'm not necessarily talking about anybody here or on this call. So I don't want anyone to take this personally. But little things like, and I've seen this as well, like on social media and stuff, like quit making fun of their generation. Just stop and celebrate their generation. Like, don't be outraged over what they believe. Quit making fun of some of the challenges that they're facing with. Quit mocking. No one has ever been mocked into the kingdom of God, ever. They've been loved, they've been discipled, they've been accepted and cultivated into the kingdom of God. I have to be careful of this because I like a good joke, so I'll take a cheap shot at almost anybody, but it's never effective. It's just funny. And when kids are dealing with the stuff that I'm talking about they're dealing with, we don't have time to just be funny. If you're going to be funny, you better be effective. So be curious. Why do you believe that? Not, hey, you're wrong, but why do you believe that? Why do you feel that way? Some of you have had conversations with students that no one ever trained you to have. And they've said, I don't even feel like this is the body I should be in. And we want to react oftentimes out of fear or intimidation or outrage. But sometimes we can also act with curiosity and begin to say, how can I help you? Why do you feel this way? What's going on? What do you think Jesus says about this? And I'm not talking about avoiding issues. I'm not talking about speaking to real contemporary issues. Please hear me when I say that. What I'm talking about is planting, cultivating, and then eventually harvesting a worldview that has grown up in the uniqueness of that student's life, rather than just ripping theirs out and planting yours or mine or anybody else's in. Because if you know anything about plants, that's the best way to kill a plant, is to just transplant it. But if you plant it and cultivate it, I think that's where the real fruit, and look at the metaphor, by the way, that Christ uses. It's constantly agricultural. And by the way, look at the fruit that Jesus talks about. And look at the fruit that Paul talks about. It's the fruit of character. It's not the fruit of outcomes or results. It's love, joy, peace, patience, all those things.
Thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed that teaching from Dr. Brian, and keep an eye out for Did We Miss Anything this week? Because we're going to have a Q&A which features questions from the pastors that he was teaching to. See you next week. Make sure to like, subscribe, and leave a comment below.